Stand by for action.
Okay, Venus?
Okay, Steve.
Gerry Anderson was, for British kids, our Walt Disney.
He is the man that we all grew up with. You really believe that these things were happening.
His television and films are just unique pieces of entertainment.
This is the voice of the Mr. Arms.
Stingray, Stingray.
Home, Parker.
Yes, Bloody.
Everything George Lucas has done, somewhere down the line, Gerry Anderson has done that first.
And yet Gerry goes unrecognised, and I think it's scandalous.
If Gerry Anderson came to Hollywood and walked down the street, I don't think anyone here in Hollywood would know who he was.
So you say Gerry Anderson, people have no idea, but as soon as you say Thunderbirds, Fireball XL5, Supercar, everybody goes, oh, right, oh, that's the guy.
I think with a little help, most people know me, but people don't rush into the street and mob me, nor do the girls. Damn. When commercial television first started, there was a company in Maidenhead who decided that they were going to become a little production company and had dreamed up a series called You've Never Seen This. The series was never seen, so it was a really good title. But the camera operator was Arthur Provis. We got on very, very well. And so when that ill-fated series came to an end, we said, why don't we start our own production company? We took with us some friends that we had met, Reg Hill and John Reed, and part-time secretary Sylvia Tam. A woman by the name of Roberta Lee turned up on the doorstep and said, I've got 52 15-minute scripts here for a children's series to be called The Adventures of Twizzle. Would you do them? Well, of course, the answer had to be yes. It was then that she said, and they're to be made with puppets. Well, my heart sank.
I say, what a funny-looking toy you are. I've never seen anything like you before.
I just wanted to make big pictures, you know, Ben-Hur.
You can tell he hasn't been here long.
The character was a little guy who could twizzle his arms. In other words, he could extend his arms and legs. You know, really deep drama this was, but it was really quite successful. The fact that we were filming with these awful creatures made me quite desperate to make the puppet film reasonable. Roberta Lee, who financed Twizzle, asked me to make a new series she'd invented called Torchy the Battery Boy.
Torchy, Torchy the Battery Boy, I'm a walkie-talkie toy.
He had a lamp in his head, and there was a charming old man, Mr. Bumbledrop, who took a shine to Torchy. And one of the lines I remember was, the old man sitting with Torchy on his lap said, do you know, Torchy, I've always wanted a toy boy.
And now, another exciting adventure from Four Feather Falls.
I decided that we should really do our own series now, and it was to be a puppet western. And they were great fun. He had magic guns which used to swivel unaided and shoot down his opponents. The show got the cover of the TV Times, which was amazing at the time. We had produced a brochure for a series to be called Supercar. A man by the name of Connery Chappell came to see us and said, I know a man, his name is Lou Grade, I'm sure he would be interested. And I showed him the brochure, and I remember Lou looking at it. And he said, yeah, looks good.
Supercar, supercar. Supercar was the very first one I ever saw. When they used to yank the car out of the water, you could always see the string.
Supercar, supercar.
During the series, Gerry went off to get married at Caxton Hall, and he and Sylvia were returning home, which was going past the studio.
And as we drove past the studio, I could see all the studio lights on, and we were doing the famous shot where Supercar came out of the sea, on a fishing line, which everybody could see. And it wasn't working, and so she went home and I stayed there till about 4 o'clock in the morning. It's a great way to have a wedding night. We had a sequence written where Dr. Beaker had to play an organ, and he got very carried away with us until he thumped the organ so hard that it fell apart. And Derek Middings came along and said, why don't we explode the organ? And that was how it all began. From there, we gave Derek his own department, and then, of course, over the years, he went out into the big wide world and did the special effects on pictures like James Bond and other huge movies, and made a great name for himself, worldwide, in fact.
Fireball XL5, I always remember watching that with my granddad. I remember it taking off on the funny old slipway, with the dodgy rockets at the back there. And I never knew what happened to the bit that it was on, because that sort of shot off in one direction and the Fireball XL5 would shoot off like that.
If I was a spaceman, I'd tell you what I'd do. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Steve Zodiac, wasn't it? And I particularly liked the robot, I was fascinated to know that Gerry did the voice.
Well, Robert, we're on our way home at last.
On our way home, on our way home, on our way home.
Gee, I keep forgetting. You're only a robot. Say, Venus, how's our beautiful doctor of space medicine?
I gather by the compliments, Steve, you want something to eat.
When it came to voice artists, Gerry Anderson played the part of Venus. At the time, I was in love with her, and I wanted to help her in her career. Fireball XL5 was most definitely influenced by the space race.
To say the atmosphere across Morecambe Bay this morning was electric is rather an understatement. Duckingfield rocket man Steve Bennett was at it again.
I remember after watching Fireball XL5, I built a scale model of the rocket out of plasticine. I think that was the very first rocket that I built. I don't think what the Americans and the Russians were doing in space inspired me that much. I mean, I was into like Fireball XL5, and they were going to Mars and all that sort of thing, and if it's possible to go to Mars, then I thought, well, what NASA was doing going to the moon was pretty tame.
We are about to launch Stingray.
There's always going to be attention paid to a catchphrase that was going to capture the attention.
Anything can happen in the next half hour.
Stand by for action. I think it was a brilliant idea. They were very simple, basic, but they worked.
The hero of Stingray was Captain Troy Tempest.
Marina, aquamarina.
It was so weird that this girl would float by and she never spoke. And then it would cut to her being she was laid on a beach somewhere looking like she was half dead. And he was gazing down at her with those glazed eyes that all the Gerry Anderson puppets seem to have.
And she was in love with Troy, of course. Very sad. No joy there, Troy. Don't think he was interested. I think he was a bit camp, Troy.
As I finished one series, Lou would usually ring towards the end and say, Gerry, can you come up tomorrow morning at 7:30 and tell me what you're going to make next? At that particular time, which I guess was around 1963, there was a terrible German mine disaster.
A refuse lake over the pit collapsed. A wall of water hurtled itself through the galleries. Miraculously, 86 men escaped. Now they could hear that not all the rest had perished. The survivors heard that help was coming.
I used to listen to the news bulletins in my car. I started thinking about a rescue organization with advanced machinery and so on. And by the time I got to Lou, I had the germ of the idea.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thunderbirds are go.
Thunderbirds was so exciting. It was like watching a Bond movie. It was blockbuster stuff, and the way that he introduced you to the characters was very like a big American film.
To make a show for children that cost as much as Thunderbirds did, it needed to be sold extensively in America.
I remember as kids, we really got into it. It was like our first soap opera in a way, and it was really one of those fantasy shows where you just want to run into the TV screen and fly off in the ship.
It was just a common love for Thunderbirds. We grew up with it.
You were just so excited about what you were going to see.
With Thunderbirds, we really went out of our way to make it more visually interesting. The sets were beautiful. The characters were beautifully sculpted. Great attention was paid to the finish of them. The smoothness of the faces, the wigs they wore, the mouth mechanisms that they spoke through. They're like superstars, like, you know, like George Clooney is and Kim Basinger.
Fireflash now 1 mile from threshold. Start tracking.
Mobile control. FAB.
The final sequence in the Thunderbirds pilot was meant to display all the facilities that the International Rescue Team had at their fingertips. This massive aircraft was coming into land at London Airport, but couldn't because there was in fact a bomb aboard which could explode it on landing. And also one of the Thunderbirds family, Tintin, was a passenger on the aircraft.
Fireflash 500 yards from threshold. Airspeed 120 knots. Increase to 105.
105. FAB.
I just felt that there were a lot of things that we could do that had probably never been done at that time with miniatures. And even now, when I look back on some of the shots, I feel that they still stand up.
The way that that whole sequence is put together, it's just a marvellous blending of very fine effects work and excellent editing. Thunderbirds as a whole probably influenced the whole cycle of disaster movies that came in the 70s, because if you look at some of those pictures like the airport movies, the Towering Inferno, Gerry did all those things first in a 50-minute episode of Thunderbirds.
Fireflash, lip port wing. Lip port wing. Cut power. Okay, Fireflash, reverse thrust. We're not gonna make it. We're running out of runway.
The rolling roads worked pretty well, I think. The roller movement created the impression that the craft was in motion, but in fact, of course, they were quite static.
Hold tight, Fireflash. Applying maximum brakes. They made it. Jolly good show, old boy.
And what a show.
Lou Grader told me to make Thunderbirds as a half-an-hour show, and I took the first one along, and we sat in the theatre, and he sat there, and when the lights came up, he jumped out of his seat and he said, "That's not a television series." And I thought, what have I done? He said, "That's a feature film."
Boys, I think we're in business.
It was one of those shows where you didn't have to say to yourself, I wonder whether it was going to be successful, and it was a smash hit from day one.
Thunderbirds really took us over as kids. And for me, the interesting parts, or the most exciting parts of each episode of Thunderbirds, was when they would launch whichever vehicle was going to go and save the world.
Thunderbird 1 was the one where the swimming pool came back, and I always used to think, what a mess. I mean, the pool must have been full of leaves. Gardener's nightmare, love.
And it was always a long process, particularly Thunderbird 2. The palm trees would go down, and they would lift up. Thunderbird 2 was ready, and then a little flap would come up at the back. So when the rockets blasted, it would sort of hit this piece here, and all the smoke and flames would go off, and it was just fantastic. And you always felt that Thunderbird 2 was massive.
And something that big with small wings, how could that have ever taken off? Be honest. That would have just tipped off the end and smashed it into the ground, wouldn't it?
Even as a kid, I knew that there was a puppet who was sitting on a chair, and I knew as a kid that the puppet was built to the chair. Another character came in. They moved the puppet to like almost as if he was going to stand. They moved him forward in the chair with the strings. And the other character came in and went, "No, don't stand up." And the character then went back to sitting. And even as a kid, I knew that puppet couldn't stand up.
Well, I used to avoid walking the puppets on the set simply because they couldn't walk.
So long, Jeff. So long.
So, yeah, we used to avoid walking like the plague.
How are the experiments going, Brains?
I still got to decode the music before I'm sure there's a code in it, if you see what I mean. Laboratory.
Brains was a slightly eccentric inventor-scientist. Sometimes very, very clever people talk very, very quickly. Brain works so fast that the voice sometimes stumbles, and it's like, well, Lady Penelope asked me to try and repair the responder in Thunderbird 4. I can't talk to you now, Parker.
It's quite clear looking at those episodes and all the stories that Gerry Anderson has a wonderful sense of humour.
Mobile Control calling International Rescue, England.
International Rescue. Lady Penelope speaking.
I think Sylvia Anderson probably was Lady Penelope. I'm sure secretly she'd love to drive around in a pink Rolls Royce in Fab 1 saying, "Drive on, Parker," in that breathy voice.
We're closing in on him, milady.
Good, Parker. Wait till we get to a clear stretch of road. We don't want to create a scene.
Very good, milady.
Yes, he had a shady past, didn't he, Parker? I think he was a safe cracker in a former life before Lady Penelope Crichton Ward saved him. And he always wondered what was going. Well, he didn't wonder then, but now I look back and I think, what was going on between those two? You know, did she like a bit of rough?
I used to go to a restaurant in Cookham. There was a waiter by the name of Arthur, and I thought, that's the very voice we want for Parker. And so I sent David Graham, who's a top voice artist, down here every day for a week to chat up Arthur and pick up his mannerisms.
I remember the first day I was sitting here with the menu in my hands, and this lovely grey-haired old character comes up and he says, "Would you like to see the wide list, sir?"
Would you like to see the wide list, sir? There's my boy. So, thanks to Mr. Henderson and Mr. Graham, old Parker was born.
We used to see this filmed in super marionation, not knowing what super marionation was.
I took the words super, marionette, and animation and combined them to make the word super marionation. And then, of course, it was filmed in super marionation. You know, it's quite impressive.
But, of course, it was a brilliant technique for its time. It meant that the wires were very thin. You could hardly see them. I think he had voice boxes planted in the puppets' heads and later on in their chests. And they were linked somehow to a synchronizer so that when you heard the dialogue in the studio, the mouth worked along sort of in sync.
When Thunderbirds first went out, it was one of the biggest merchandising successes of all time.
All the kids were after it. Toys, annuals, records, games.
All the kids were playing with Thunderbird toys. They were all dressed up in Thunderbird uniforms.
I had the proper Thunderbirds outfit, the little blue outfit with the sash and the little laser gun.
We'd talk about it and we'd reenact it with the models that we had. And I also liked Fab 1 as well, because that was a heck of a vehicle as well. That was really exciting.
You could also get TV 21 with all the characters in. That was fantastic.
You sold 1.25 million copies a week, which is a record that stands to this day. And the comic was receiving 30,000 letters a week.
Thunderbirds. Thunderbirds are go.
Lou Grade was very dear to my heart. We'd made Thunderbirds, and I said to him, how about a feature film? And he immediately said, yep, let's make one.
Dr. Pierce, come back in here, quickly.
Brad, skip the countdown. We're lifting off.
But, Paul, you may not make it. You may not have enough fuel.
We've no choice. We're coming up. Okay, Greg, lift off.
I've always wanted to do something different. You know, whatever we do, new series, something different. New sequence, something different. So I thought of this idea of having Rolls-Royce floating through space and arriving at the nightclub.
It had to be a dream sequence. It was the romantic interlude in the picture.
Why, hello there, Penny.
We built a tank on the stage, about 20 or 30 foot. And in that tank we put dry ice so that we gave the fluffy cloud effect.
Where to, milady?
Why, the swinging star, of course.
We had terrific puppets of Cliff Richards and the Shadows, and they wrote the song for it.
Wow, what a terrific group.
Yes, they always play at the Swinging Star. You see, they're way out.
It was somewhat flattering to be told that they'd like to make us into puppets and perhaps improve us to a degree, I suppose, and appear in a movie. And it was a lot of fun, and to write a few songs for it too. So we were all very up for the idea, and we're very positive about it.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, we present the biggest star in the universe, none other than Cliff Richard Jr.
I remember at the premiere, when Cliff Richard first came on the screen, the girl in the balcony screamed, and the entire audience just collapsed. You know, the thought of somebody screaming at Cliff Richard's puppet was just too much for everybody.
We found it very amusing, really, but also, as I said, very flattering.
A shooting star will shoot you, and Mars will go to war.
They obviously wanted something that was connected to the thought of stars and space and things like this.
I had guitars made larger than life, so that when the puppet sat on them, they rather looked like Alibaba flying on the flying carpet.
Well, the premiere was held at the London Pavilion. The whole of Piccadilly Circus was at a standstill. I can honestly say I've never seen as many photographers, either before or since. As soon as they got Sylvia and I together, all the photographers came round and all the pictures were there. And I can tell you, it was very embarrassing to me at times because there were 4 directors, myself, Reg Hill, Sylvia and John Reed, and we all worked very, very hard. Husband and wife team, that was invented by the media. We left the theatre after the show. The manager said to me, he said, I've got a very late night ahead of me. He said, because, you know, when we have pictures of this calibre, people start queuing 4 o'clock in the morning. And you can imagine how I felt. I thought, this is it, you know, we're made. But it was a disaster. And I can only think that it was because at that time, people weren't used to seeing television productions turned into feature films. And I think people saw Thunderbird on the hoardings and said, oh, we've seen that at home, you know. Not going to pay to go and see it in the cinema. I remember when I saw Lou about Thunderbirds, I had just assumed that he would say, make another series. But in fact, he said that he could sell a new series more easily. And he was the boss, so that was the end of Thunderbirds.
Captain Scarlett, sir? After the rendezvous has been effected, return here to Cloud Base.
Yes, sir. You could buy the red hat which had a pull on it, and if you pulled it down too tight, the plastic bit would rip. So you'd have to make sure it was just on there, resting on top of your head. And of course then the thing had come down. But unlike Captain Scarlett, it had come down to there. You just go poof,
The story was fairly simple in as much as people were travelling across Mars to see if they could find life.
Well, you take a look at that.
They came across a very bizarre city, and they were looking at it when the people in the city swung a telescope out to look at these Earth people.
They're obviously hostile.
Our people thought this was a gun, and so they immediately opened fire and destroyed the Martian city. The invisible people, who became known later on as the Mysterons, decided that they would pay the people of Earth back for what they had done.
This is the voice of the Mysterons. We know that you can hear us, Earthmen. Our retaliation will be slow, but nonetheless effective.
And the circles, I used to love that when the little rings came up. Captain Black would kill you, wouldn't he? And then all of a sudden the rings would appear and you'd come alive again. Ooh, nasty character.
And the camera would then pan up. But of course it was a Mysteron replacement. And because our people never knew who or what they were dealing with, it was a very good format for high adventure.
Dr. Fawn reports that despite his fatal injuries, he is returning to life and is no longer under the control of the Mysterons.
You could have the crap beaten out of him, but he'd always come back. Do you know what I mean? He was indestructible. Dun, 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 boom, gung, gung, bing.
Engines 2 and 3, immediate launch.
SIG. Good luck.
Of course, 5 gorgeous birds flying airplanes, you know what I mean? At that time, you go, birds flying planes. There's your imagination running wild. But of course now, we let them drive cars.
We'd made a lot of shows now, and we were virtually drowning in our own product. And then Lou uttered the magic words, Gerry, I think you better switch to live action. Like this was going to be a problem. And I remember sort of trying to be terribly manly and saying, yes, yes, what a good idea. Of course, when I got outside the door, I did a sort of, wow! Suddenly there were these big movie stages and live action sets and artists. But I thought, hey, isn't it marvelous? These people can walk through a door, sit down, and they talk in sync. You know, their mouths move and they're in sync with the dialogue. They can pick up telephones. This is really wonderful.
Directing artists was a totally different thing for me. Terrifying. I had a nice little spot on the way to work that I would get out of the car, be sick and carry on, and just hope that a bus would hit you on the way.
And who will command this international band of heroes?
Ed Bishop is one of the most talented people I've ever worked with. And my only sadness was that he didn't go on to become an international star. I would have loved him to have perhaps been James Bond.
I started to dye my hair. And in those days, they didn't have unisex beauty salons, so I had to go to a woman's beauty salon in Mayfair in London and sit there under the hairdryer with a whole room full of women, and that was very bad news.
Oh, UFO was brilliant, yeah. The costumes, the wigs, Gabrielle Drake being very sexy.
I had to do a sort of demonstration, a sort of, you know, unvelcroing it and taking the bits off, and then you were just left with the sort of the silver bit and a miniskirt. But golly, you couldn't have got dressed that quickly with it. I mean, it took some getting into. I believe the series became very, very popular in Japan, and we subsequently heard that a lot of the Japanese had adopted this hairstyle. It was a great revelation going to rushes and seeing the stuff that we weren't involved in, you know, the spacecraft landing. It was amazing, and you saw this incredible machine coming in over the sea and landing, and then you'd see this huge Wellington boot come in and pick it up.
If you ask me which were the difficult shots to do, I think maybe, on reflection, I should say flying those damn flying saucers. The top part was held on 4 wires, and in the actual glass, or the perspex part of it, we had a motor. So the bottom part actually spun, and on that part we had these, what I keep referring to as paddles, and I covered those with a very highly reflective tape, so that when it was going around, it caught the light, it would flash and strobe and just make the flying saucer have this sort of ethereal look to it.
I remember that actually we've been filming UFO for a little while, and there was the first moon landing that ever was. And it was really extraordinary because, you know, you saw all the close-ups of all the machinery and everything, and it looked exactly like our studio set. I mean, amazing. You'd have thought that they'd have copied ours.
Saturation density?
We did anticipate the gull wing doors, cars, and the mobile telephones. All that was anticipated. And video conferencing, you know, from the moon back and forth. They're doing that all now. They finally caught up with UFO.
For the first 17 episodes, we led the ratings in New York and Los Angeles, which are the 2 key markets in America. So it was hugely successful. The American office phoned through and said, "Gerry, quick, we want a second series." And we started to get ready for a second series. And then, for some reason or other, the ratings dipped a little, which they always do on shows. And they panicked and told Lou to cancel the series.
Everything was going to be better. We were poised for that, and to not be able to realize it was a deep, deep disappointment. It took me a long time to get over that.
And I was very upset, so I went to see Lou and I said, "Look, we've done a lot of work, and I reckon that I could twist this around and make it into another science fiction show." Abe Mandel, the president of Lou's company in New York, phoned and said, "I want you to do something to the show that will make it impossible for you to shoot a show on Earth." So we blew the moon out of orbit.
There was no series shooting in England that carried the amount of effects that we did.
Brian Johnson, he did some brilliant work on very modest budgets. Okay, take major American film productions, they'd spend a fortune on special effects and getting some marvelous special effects, but I think Brian Johnson was doing it at about 1/20th of their budgets and getting very, very good-looking stuff.
It was a big challenge to effectively do a feature film job on a television series, incorporating a lot of space fiction shots and things, which I wanted to do. We gave it that real hard space age sort of look, which for TV production was quite new. We were always
short of money when we were trying to make the very best pictures we could. And we had to get up to all sorts of tricks. I mean, these things are nothing special today, but when we wanted to film explosions in space, we used to have a black roof in the special effects studio, hang the charge from the roof, put the camera on the floor shooting upwards, and then detonate the charge. And of course, the stuff used to fall into camera.
As you know, our moon has been blasted out of orbit. We have been completely cut off from planet Earth.
Very unlike Star Trek. We were not really equipped to go out into deep space like that. I mean, we were not able to if we wanted to. The fact that this enormous accident happened and thrust us into a condition that we were neither technologically nor emotionally ready for was fascinating to me. And that was the intention of the first year, was a real condition. It was new. It didn't look like anything else. It didn't feel like anything else. It was its own person. I will say that in the second year, it did become more of a comic strip.
A sign of friendship on my planet Maya.
At the time of the second series of Space 1999, my life with Sylvie was becoming totally untenable.
Well, it was obvious to all of us they were going through a difficult period. I was fairly close to both of them and didn't enjoy it one little bit.
The professional relationship was made in heaven because Gerry was an expert at what he did and she was an expert at what she did. And the two of them combined was a double whammy. You couldn't stop.
The truth of the matter was that we were getting along so badly we could hardly talk to each other.
But unfortunately, life, as it sometimes tends to do, gets in the way and gets up to its tricks, and it didn't work out.
And that's when I said, I've had enough, I'm going. I bought a flat because at that time I was convinced I would be a bachelor for the rest of my life. Things were at a very, very low ebb. I had totally lost my confidence. I had lost all my money on court cases, trying to get access to my little boy.
I think it's always very difficult when you're in that tower to be there on your own when everything's going wrong. You really need someone to turn and talk to.
I remember I used to go into the local pub hoping somebody would talk to me, and they never did. So I was very, very lonely. And there was a very sophisticated girl standing there with beautiful white hands and long fingernails and very well spoken. And I remember thinking, oh, yes, I'd like to get to know you. I've never been very good with women, so I kind of went home and rehearsed how I was going to ring her, and I made up some cock and bull story and invited her over, and that's how it all began. In my biography, the dedication reads, "To Mary, who saved my life." As a matter of fact, she used to go out to work and earn money while I was at home wearing an overcoat because the flat was so cold and we couldn't afford to put the heating on, writing a script.
I mean, how dare that happen to a guy that was such a genius, is such a genius, really?
Christopher Burr, who I got to know quite well, was undoubtedly a brilliant, brilliant businessman. As I've already said, things were very bad with me. And Mary said to me, why did you have a word with Christopher? He seems to be a very bright man. And I did. And he said, you've got a name for making puppet films. Why don't you make a new series? And I'll get the money from Japan. And the company was on its feet, and we never looked back. Very difficult series to get going. We had to shoot at Bray Studios on a very small stage. Money was very tight. And I think we did a remarkable job for the money we had, but it certainly wasn't big time. It felt like big time simply because I had been resting for so long.
there that I had worked with in the past. It was very exciting setting up again, and it was like going back in time a bit.
We will drink to the downfall of the accursed Terrorhawks. Victory will be ours.
Zelda, you must listen to me.
What is it?
My news.
Mary came rushing up with something that I'd never seen one before. It was a piece of perspex with a red circle and I think it was a yellow circle in the middle. And I sort of said, "What's that?" And she said, "That's going to be your child."
A baby.
And I was horrified. I said, "Well, we can't go ahead with this, not at my age." And she said, well, why? And I said, well, I mean, you know, I'll be dead before the child's grown up. And she said, well, maybe I will be too, you know. And she was very philosophical about it, and she talked me into it. Suddenly I had a family again. Everything returned to normal. Everything was repaired, and life is great once more. John Needham, who worked for Mentorn Films, said to me, do you have any properties we might be interested in? I said, well, it just so happens I've got something called Space Police. We started the production, and then we found that Lego had a toy out called Space Police, so we couldn't use the title. And we had to come up with another one, which was Space Precinct. The series was going to cost about $36 million, so, you know, it was a large chunk of money. It was a show that was very advanced. We put people into complete masks, which covered the whole of the front back of their head.
The people in there had a very rough time. If they had a day's work, a 10-hour day's work, by the time they'd done 10 hours, in and out of the suit every sort of half an hour, they'd be exhausted. They had a very rough time. I felt very sorry for them, actually.
Police, freeze! I was one of those aliens that got killed off each week, and then you could put on a different alien head, become a different alien, and then get killed off again the next week. So I'm an expert at being shot and dying.
The mime artist came to see me one day, and they demonstrated their mime in the office, which was very good.
We were looking for an idea that would be an entertaining idea. I mean, no one knew who we were, but we knew that people knew what Thunderbirds was.
And then I said, well, how can I help you? And they said, well, one of them said, I want a Thunderbird 2 hat. And the other one said, yes, and I want a Thunderbird 1 hat. And I thought, I've got a couple of loonies here. So I sent them over to the model shop.
And it was our way of conveying the flying of the models.
Thunderbirds are go.
At the time, we had no idea what a nostalgic trip that would be. The first run at the Apollo, we took the box office record, and we had more people in that theatre than they'd ever had before. My image of it, of people actually hanging off the ceiling, I'm sure they actually weren't, but it felt like that, absolutely packed to the gills. They couldn't believe what they were seeing, because there was a couple of guys, a couple of rockets, and no set, and they could see everything, every detail. We tried very hard not to actually spoof the puppets or spoof the series. We tried to create the show seriously, and in our seriousness of doing it, the absurdity of the two of us on stage would then be funny. So in terms of the movement of the puppets, we try and create that little wobble of the head, and then when the bodies turned, you know, the head would follow a little bit later.
There's so many panel games now where they say to a contestant, right, we want you to walk like one of Gerry Anderson's puppets. And they do these ridiculous walks, and I sit there thinking, in fact, the puppets never walk like that. It's that goddamn Thunderbird show that's done all this.
Thunderbirds were suddenly enjoying a renaissance. Kids were watching Thunderbirds on television, and the videos had been released. And they wanted to get hold of Tracy Island, and they couldn't get hold of it anywhere.
It was a toy that was sold out completely. I mean, Toys R Us, there were people queuing on Saturday and Sunday morning, you know, 5 or 6 deep, all the way around the block, from Brentford to you name it, they were queuing for it.
He queued for about 5 hours and got me one. I was so excited to get one at Christmas, and when I opened the present, I never knew what it was, so so excited to get it. Only about 4 of us in our class got one, so I was the lucky one.
Gerry's shows are becoming more popular than ever. In fact, he has so many fans around the world that they have formed Fanderson, the official Gerry Anderson Appreciation Society.
Fans can come and meet the people that actually worked on the programmes, see an exhibition of the original models and puppets. Just generally sort of like a nice social gathering, really, for people who are very keen on these programmes. We were invited to become involved with memorabilia to put on a small display. As time's gone on, it's got a bit bigger than we were originally expecting. The place is heaving.
If you're a Star Wars fan, it's the place to be. See, Star Wars is quite easy to start to get hold of, but the Gerry Anderson stuff, that's the difficult stuff to get. Right, I've actually seen something that's caught my eye now. Up here is the first edition of TV21. If you get close enough, that is going for £100.
In fact, Gerry has found a whole new generation of fans. If you want to know how popular his shows are, you only have to ask the regulars at the Fab Cafe in Manchester.
I don't think you can actually put your finger on why they're so popular, but they just are. There's just a whole feel to them that just really appeals to a wide age range.
I just like the characters and the way they move and the whole like retro style of it, because you know, retro's well cool now, isn't it?
If you don't know Gerry Anderson, you need to check him out. He's as important as God or Elvis. In the avenues and alleyways. Quite regularly, the Fab people put a party on, and this is one of those parties.
I thought we were going to open a bar. We want it to be a media bar because Manchester is very media orientated. And we love Gerry Anderson shows, and we thought, well, we'll have a bar called Fab Cafe. Not necessarily because it is a Gerry Anderson theme bar, but we do have quite a lot of props from the series. It was just that it was going to be a nice meeting place for people, and then it took up really big, and now it's very successful. I remember Gerry walking through the door, and it was like the Pope coming to visit a Catholic church. It was like that sort of presence, the Fab Cafe, Gerry Anderson.
Being influenced by the Thunderbirds TV series when I was a kid, I wanted to kind of show the whole world just what the series meant to me. And I wanted to give something back to Gerry as a kind of tribute and say, you know, look what you made me do.
If I am still going strong, I believe that I'll shortly be making a new series of Captain Scarlet. And I would like to think that we will follow that by making a new series of Thunderbirds. And then perhaps the most important thing of all, to make a feature film based on Thunderbirds. And I think that's about as far as I dare think ahead. I think my career has been a very long journey. People say to me these days, when are you going to retire? And I say to them, well, if you can tell me a good reason why I should retire, then maybe I'll consider it. I don't really know anything other than making films. And if that's what you enjoy doing, why do you, at a given age, say, I'm going to stop now and I'm going to go home and I'm going to be bored out of my mind? I will continue as long as I'm able, and we'll just have to see how long that will be.
Gerry Anderson, for me, created an exciting, blockbuster, glamorous, spectacular world, which I will never forget. Those images are in my brain forever, for as long as I live. And thank you, Gerry.
I wish I was a spaceman, the fastest guy alive. I'd fly you around the universe in Fireball XL5. Way out in space together, conquerors of the sky. My heart would be a fireball, a fireball.